When it comes to business,
You'll find the experts here.
Voice America Business Network.
Welcome to CIO Talk Radio with your host, Sanjo Gall. All comments, views, and opinions expressed on this show are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers. Here's Sanjo Gall.
Good morning and welcome to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. Today's topic is justifying IT PMO in an economic downturn. Our guest for today's show is Christopher Crowhurst. He's the Vice President of Architecture and Business Systems Infrastructure with Thomson Reuters. Good morning, Chris. How are you doing?
Good morning. Very well, thank you. It's great to be back on your show.
Thank you so much again for accepting the invitation. So how's life and how's business and how's weather? Because I come from Chicago, which has been nasty this year.
Well, let's take the easy one first, which is the weather, which is dreadful. It's a good thing that I have such a great family. Otherwise, I have no idea why I'd be living in Minnesota this year. I think I had the coldest day of my life. We hit minus 25 recently, and that was bone-chilling.
Oh, wow.
In terms of the business is looking relatively strong. I think we're very well positioned to deal with the economic downturn that we're all facing. It's changed a lot of our approaches, and also it's presented a renewed challenge to us in IT to ensure that we are maximizing our opportunities to keep our costs down and leverage, which makes this such a good topic today.
Yeah, and in fact, it is so timely because more than any time else, the M&A situation would have created a lot of different initiatives that you have to kick off or reconsider, and that's where ideally PMO could create a great value for, or it could potentially provide a good framework for you to go about seeing what works, what doesn't, and keep an eye on the whole thing. However, for most people, when they put the PMO in place, then what happens is they would underutilize or they would have returns, but they're mostly intangible, which they have tough time justifying. And so where is the threshold where you say, okay, PMO is justified, or we should have a lean PMO, or we should significantly invest in PMO? So what is that magic formula, if you will?
Well, I think it's going to vary by organization. The way we look at it is that a PMO is just like any leveraged service. So what are you attempting to gain leverage in when you create a PMO? Is it common practices and principles? Is it being able to use those project managers across a diverser set of projects? Or is it simply to remove a layer of management and manage the PMO holistically from an HR perspective? So I think once you define the leverage that you're trying to achieve, you can then look to see what structure is best suited to do that. A good example in our organization is that we have one project management in my organization. However, it has two distinct functions. One is MIS application project management, and the other is data center infrastructure project management. So we're achieving best practices that are unique to both of those domains and achieving the appropriate performance improvements and leverage there. But at the same time, we're also having holistic management of the PMO under one director that allows us to decrease our need for individual tiers of management across the two PMOs, where traditionally we actually had two separate PMOs with two separate management organizations above them. We've been able to streamline that. So we're achieving several different tangible opportunities there. The intangibles are really when you get down into the best practices, which is how do you measure the process improvement effects. And it's sometimes very difficult to put metrics in place to quantify that. Do you do it based upon number of projects? It's probably an inconsistent way of doing it, given the diversity of size of projects. Is it revenue related to the products or scope of infrastructure deployed? It's a very challenging thing to understand the efficiency of a PMO. And I think that really starts to get to the essence of what this question is about. I think the other thing, which is, it's not necessarily the complexity of the projects or the number of projects, more a case of most organizations already have a large collection of project managers if they're managing a large collection of projects. And the question about should there be a PMO is, are there synergies between the tasks they're performing? Should there be? And would a PMO be the most suitable way of creating those synergies?
So would you say that it's just a cool way, or actually I would not use the word cool in a negative sense, but it's a good way to get a structure to the chaos or a potential, or you can say prevention of chaos is what PMO could bring, because you think that there are too many moving parts. Is that more the visibility or more the control, what you're concerned about because of which you introduced PMO?
Well, I think it does a couple of things. First of all, the creation of a PMO puts a spotlight on the cost of project management in that it allows you to quantify it across the whole organization. So immediately you create a PMO and the first thing you'll be told is, wow, we spend way too much money on project management. The fact is you've been spending that much money for years, and it's more now that you have visibility into it and see the cost associated with the value that a PMO creates or that project management creates. So the clarity then allows you to make decisions about is that appropriate level of investment for the amount of project work that you're carrying on. I think the next thing that allows you to do is to put someone responsible for seeing if there are opportunities to reduce the chaos by creating synergies around process that is working well in different projects, and also to ensure that the appropriate experienced resources are focused on the business priorities. So it gives you an opportunity to remove experienced project managers from areas where maybe they're being underutilized on lower value projects and reapply them to the real business priorities. So by moving the ownership of the resources into a central function, you free yourself from the problem of having project managers owned by domain owners who maybe have individual projects that need project management, but not necessarily at the experience level of the resources that they have in their actual direct responsibility.
Now, how much of effort is this for it to be having a very bulky department, you can say headcount? Because frankly, when you talk about somebody be able to analyze what people are doing wrong, and if there are a number of, say, data crunchers available, an IT professional could very well look into this and get a visibility of where the inefficiencies may be, and they could get one or two resources for this purpose. So I'm not trying to, say that PMO is not at all needed, but sometimes we may be spending way too much, or it may be an overkill in certain situations. Wouldn't you think?
Sure. I think those are very valid points. Now, we, interestingly enough, have one resource in our project management office dedicated to optimizing the processes within the project management office. Project management office is around 40 individuals at the moment, and one of those resources is dedicated to the business processes of project management. We also, interestingly, have a group that's managed in parallel with the PMO, which is dedicated to process management across our whole infrastructure organization. And so, we're achieving process synergies in a separate group than we are necessarily achieving project management synergies. I think that the overhead of creating a PMO is actually very light. When we look at it, we probably have a director above both of the PMOs, and then we have each of the PMOs managed by an individual, and then underneath them they have approximately 20 project managers arranged sort of through seniority and through dedication to specific projects. So as an organization, it's relatively flat. When you look at the organization that those individuals came from, they were embedded at various levels under various management structures, and it would be very hard for an individual to be responsible for ensuring that they were all following optimal processes. So the centralization has certainly presented us the opportunity to look for best practices and to improve the consistent reporting and measuring of the project performance and financials. So we're certainly seeing in an organization of our scale substantial improvements by moving to that model. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely, but we are already seeing the benefits of that increased visibility through consistent reporting and processes that are in place. That said, I've worked in organizations far smaller where you maybe have one or two project managers who are directly accountable to an executive, and frankly, the organization does not warrant that being a separate department. So you're absolutely right that a certain scale is required before this makes sense. But at the same time, when you aren't centralizing or providing a single mechanism for developing the project management process, you do run the risk of having a fairly chaotic process within your organization.
Now, with the centralization, also could potentially come the risk where the manager, at the end of the day, has to deal with other people who they may who should be actually on a regular basis interacting with the same set of people if possible, and then it comes down to actually managing a project. The overall delegation and people listening to them and the overall execution and implementation could become easier. So if all the project managers sit on a high pedestal, if you will, or a sacred pedestal, which is PMO, and then they are invited into a project, they may not have the interaction, the relationships, if you will, with the rest of the crew.
Yes,
and that could jeopardize to some extent what would be the outcome of a given project.
I think that's exactly true, and that reflects the same problem that centralized architecture functions have, which is something that we've talked about in the past. And I think that the ivory tower of just the word like center of excellence make me shudder at the thought of the implied organizational behavior that it will create. So I think that you're correct that if a PMO is not deeply integrated into the activities of the team which they're supposed to be managing and reporting on the project activities, then they do run the risk of being in effect rejected and held at arm's length by the project teams. So the way we're dealing with that is we're trying to identify what are the services that a project management group offers to the constituent sort of consumers of that service, which are the business units within our division. And so by identifying those services, we're able to articulate the value that we can bring. For example, in some of our areas, we manage the project portfolio for businesses so that they no longer have to deal with the aggregation of multiple project costs, and we're able to manage that for them. So there's a very tangible benefit that they see there. Trying to articulate your value in terms of intangibles is never going to be a very successful activity. So we certainly see that. The other thing that you run the risk of, though, is that if at the end of the day each project team just makes a request and says, well, I need that specific individual PMO always to work on my project, do you truly actually have a leveraged organization then if that person is always dedicated to a particular project or a particular group's activities? So you have to balance the need to create relationships between the project managers and the technology organizations, and at the same time establish the flexibility to leverage those people across multiple areas. Otherwise, at the end of the day, all you're going to end up with is a process synergy and a HR management synergy, and not necessarily get the flexibility and leverage of the individuals being able to migrate between projects and domains that I think is where you can realize some of the true value of a PMO.
Let's take a quick break, listeners. We'll be right back after these messages. And think about a scenario where you could have a functional organization where like IT professionals, or maybe a business analyst or a project manager who is working very closely with that team of people, but also has a dotted line relationship with the PMO for all metrics and other data crunching needs and oversight needs. So would that allow us to eat the cake and have it too? That is, to not be looked at as sitting in the ivory tower and trying to manage projects and really reduce the risk that may otherwise would have creeped in. Stay tuned. We'll be right back and discuss.
Up-to-date business and financial news. Call now and get the financial information you need. 866-472-5790. 866-472-5790.
The experts are here.
Voice America Business Network.
Looking for flexible ways to scale your IT efforts? Then visit www.avol.com today. Avol helps companies find the global IT talent they need to align their IT and business objectives. Whether it's hiring top IT leadership talent or building a reliable technology team, Avol delivers. To find out how Avol can help your company, visit www.avol.com or call 1-800-947-2832. Avol, delivering global IT talent. That's www.avol, A-V-V-A-L, avol.com. Visit today.
Now, Mrs. Johnson, before we close on your mortgage loan, I want to make sure you remember Mike.
Hi, you can trust me. I'm African American, just like you.
So, here's the low monthly payments and interest rates we promised, and here's where they triple.
The rest of this stuff is just here to make sure that we get your house when you can't pay us back.
What a lovely house.
Predatory lenders are never this easy to spot. Call us at 866-222-FAIR and protect yourself with the facts. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Fair Housing Alliance and the Ad Council.
There are so many challenges facing management today around the world. The new Management Network is here to provide practical insight and solutions for many of these challenges. Hosts Don and Bonnie Folk will explore topics designed to help you get the competitive upper hand, including organizational tools, personality and leadership, cutting-edge management tips, and much more. Join the new Management Network live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Business Network.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. If you have a question or comment, call toll-free 1-866-472-5790. Now back to the show. Here's Sanjog Gall.
Welcome back. So we are talking about a possible solution to eating the cake and having it too, is to let this individual remain within that team where everybody enjoys each other's company and relationship is not an issue, and have a dotted line with the PMO where the number crunching and oversight and other aspects of PMO could be handled very well. So would that not be the, you can say, creative solution to this problem?
Well, I think that there are many functions where the exact same challenge exists, and I think the question is what's your scale of the situation in the first place? So, are we dealing with 20 or 30 project managers, or are we dealing with 5 project managers? And I think the solution is going to vary based upon that. I think it also brings up the very important question that you mentioned, which is to do with the relationships and how do you mitigate relationships, and beyond relationships as well, intimacy with the different technologies that you're managing and the processes that you're managing. So, for example, could you take a project manager who is very familiar with server deployments and infrastructure and ask them to manage a large-scale SAP deployment? I would suggest not. The skills associated with project management are generic at a level of some process, but it's not possible to be an effective project manager without having some degree of intimacy with the project that you're managing, without having some knowledge of the technology and some knowledge of the people and organization with which you're in. In terms of our ability to manage people in a federated model, as you described, with just the dotted line relationships versus the centralized model where all people remain in the center, we're challenged by the relationship consistency, as you pointed out. But what we are able to do is, because, at the end of the day, you're dealing with a relatively small number of companies. We're dealing with, maybe a dozen companies having project requests coming in. So there are the opportunities for many of the project managers to span many of the business units. So I wouldn't suggest that we have full flexibility of taking any one of our resources and applying them to any one of our projects, and that we do indeed allow our business units to request individuals to assist on their projects, and some of them do that consistently, and in those situations we have to compensate by ensuring we're staffed appropriately. But we also do create situations where we have teams of individuals who are familiar with a specific type of technology and would be the people that we would apply to those specific projects. So we have people that are very familiar with our ERP solution or our CRM solution, and we use those to manage all of the ERP and CRM application projects. That's one of the main reasons why we have this segregation of our PMO into an infrastructure and MIS area rather than one fully matrixed organization, because the technology skills required to manage those two are very different. And whilst they all have the same financial reporting needs and a degree of milestone reporting needs that are consistent, at the same time it's a very different technology base, and it's also a very different set of technologists that they have to interact with. So by reducing the flexibility of where we apply the project managers down to sort of large buckets of project types and technology types, I think we've got an interesting balance between the intimacy of relationships and technologies to the flexibility of the workforce. That said, you could move to a model where everybody is federated out into the technology and project areas, and then you're simply looking at an aggregation point of standardized reporting and financial metrics. The question I would have there, though, is, are you then able to leverage those people to work in different areas? And I suspect that your ability to move people around would be hindered by the sort of, I call it fiefdoms, which is managers generally attempt to protect the headcount in their organizations to ensure they have a large enough sphere of influence to represent, an important value to the organization. So I suspect that people would be very reticent to allow a fluid movement of solid line reporting relationships to allow projects to be managed by the most appropriate people. So that's what I would see is probably the biggest hindrance to the dotted line into the PMO being in a large organization.
Now, about the very existence of PMO, many organizations which are mighty large and very complex, and they really do need that level of oversight and centralization. Definitely, by all means, God bless you, go ahead, create a good-looking PMO. However, most companies don't fall into that category, and they're not large enough to be able to justify that 800-pound gorilla type of mini organization, which we call as PMO. So how about create a PMO light version for situations where you don't want to go the full-blown way? And is there an existence, or is there a possibility of creating a light version of something which is not going to consume most of your resources and not be able to justify the incremental expense?
Yeah, I think the question there is, there's probably three ways to do this. There's the one, as you say, the 800-pound gorilla, let's make a PMO. The second one is a hybrid, where you say, let's have some central function. Maybe it's responsible for process and metric consistency, and maybe some financial accountability for the number of project managers in the organization, but does not actually own, through solid line relationships, the human resources. And then there's the third model, where there is no centralized function at all, and there's simply a community of people managing projects who collaborate and share best practices. When I think about my experiences in technology, I've seen our large corporation move in different areas, not specifically project management, but in other areas, mature from a best practice sharing organization to a dotted line organization to some solid and some dotted line. So I think there are many hybrids that an organization can transition through as it scales up, but not just in size, but also in organizational maturity, because there's a certain maturity around the way you run the financials as an organization to understand the costs and opportunities associated with project management as a unique function and as a value-providing capability, rather than simply a sunk cost on every project that you have. So if you have an organization that truly values the role of project management in the execution of projects, I think you're going to have a much easier case to justify some level of investment in introducing consistency. And maybe starting out by not calling something a project management office is a good idea, because it comes with such a stigma in some organizations, and sort of harks back to big old days of large projects with massive PMO organizations consuming a large proportion of the budget. So I think that definitely in small organizations, the starting point for most of these things, as well as large organizations, is simple community and collaboration. So creating a mechanism that allows the group of people that are managing projects to discuss how to do it well, to adopt a common approach, and if not a common approach to management, at least a common approach to reporting. And I think you'll find that in most organizations, CFOs are pushing for consistency in the way they get to view project financial reporting. And that will probably act as a motivation for project managers who probably are responsible for that reporting to start collaborating on mechanisms to do it. And whilst most organizations would probably, of the scale you're talking about, would say, we don't have a project management office, they probably do have consistent financial reporting. They probably do have consistent templates that they use to aggregate the reports to share with the executives in the company. And that's the starting point for consistency. And that's where collaboration is probably already taking place at the grassroots level. And acknowledging that and facilitating that will allow more and more value to be derived from that collaboration that may then result in the formation of a role or a partial role specifically dedicated to improving and facilitating the collaboration and then consistency about the activities of the people responsible for the task, even if it's not called out as a PMO.
So that is what you would call as an inexpensive PMO or a PMO light of sorts.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing to do, nowadays there are so many social networking sites for professionals that you can reach out to these different project management organizations, and there are already communities of project managers willing to share their insights into how to manage projects effectively, to report on performance, and to deal with project management in federated organizations. So I think that you don't even need to create the PMO light necessarily within the walls of your own organization, and that collaborating in external communities is one way to garner that best practice information that larger corporations have benefited from just from internal experience. So I think that small organizations have a great opportunity nowadays to benefit from the experiences and wisdoms of larger PMOs to understand what is successful and what isn't.
Now, one of the benefits that is shared with most people who are trying to, buy PMO, or the folks who are selling PMO, they say that PMO can help prevent project failures. How much of that is actually true, and how well a job does PMO actually do or can do?
Well, at the end of the day, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with a statement by someone saying that a PMO can prevent project failures. I think what a PMO can do is highlight where projects are being challenged or are having, running into problems. But at the end of the day, the project management organization is unlikely to be the one that's going to solve the problem. They may be able to facilitate the resolution of the problem. And so if we think about a PMO as being a consistent, facilitated process of execution on a project, then assuming that the process highlights and identifies the challenges that a project is having in a more earlier and proactive way than the processes that exist without a PMO, then I guess the statement is true, that consistent process should allow you to identify challenges and provide a mechanism to help facilitate the resolution of those problems. But will a PMO just stop projects from failing? Absolutely not. I mean, if we think about the success rate of IT projects is around 20% of projects manage to hit their time, their finances, and their full scope. I can guarantee that more than 20% of projects are executed under the auspices of a project management office. And so I would say that history has told us that having a PMO does not instantly guarantee the success of projects and prevent their failures. So rather than, does a PMO provide you a mechanism for preventing these projects, it gives you the opportunity to put in place processes to help the organization respond to challenges consistently and at the earliest opportunity. And I think that's the sort of the emphasis that we have on, which is early and frequent reporting of problems is the answer to resolving them. And I think that centralization and disconnecting the PMO from the individual project owner has the advantage of it removes the emotion attached to reporting problems. When a PMO is integrated into a project team, I've seen situations where there is a tendency for the project team to try and hide the challenges so that they can just solve them themselves, because in some organizations there's a feeling that airing a problem means I've failed to resolve it. And that's certainly not a culture that I would like to promote. Instead, the independence of the project manager to be able to stand up and say this project is being challenged and we should look beyond the scope of our group to get a solution to this challenge is one of the benefits of having that independence from the project team that a centralized PMO gives you. So I think there are some definite advantages to a PMO in dealing with challenge projects, and I think that rigor around the process and reporting of a project will help facilitate that, but it's certainly no silver bullet.
Let's take a quick break, listeners, and we'll be right back after these messages. And think about a scenario that someone is flying a Boeing 777. And PMO could be taken as the navigator because that's the individual or that group is actually telling where to go, how you can time to reach, and if there's going to be any turbulence, so you got get out of there. But who's on the pilot seat, and who is supposed to be accountable for making sure that the PMO somebody's cross-checking even what PMO is telling, and then eventually is able to allow this Boeing 777 to land safely on ground or take off. So let's talk about this when we come back from the break. Please stay tuned.
Whether the market's up or down, or if you're looking to improve your portfolio, our experts are ready to talk to you. Call now toll free 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network.
Have you found yourself overwhelmed or stalled, not getting the goals you dream of? Hear what the experts say about how you can break through. Solutions, systems, skills. Get your strategy on track and accelerate your business success. Join Linda Feinholz every Monday for The Spark Effect. Linda and her guests will show you and your team exactly how to grow your business further, faster, easier. The Spark Effect is heard every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Business Network.
Looking for flexible ways to scale your IT efforts? Then visit www.avol.com today. Avol helps companies find the global IT talent they need to align their IT and business objectives. Whether it's hiring top IT leadership talent or building a reliable technology team, Avol delivers. To find out how Avol can help your company, visit www.avol.com or call 1-800-947-2832. Avol, delivering global IT talent. That's www.avol, A-V-V-A-L, avol.com. Visit today.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. If you have a question or comment, call toll-free 1-866-472-5790. Now back to the show. Here's Sanjo Gal.
Welcome back. So we were talking about flying a Boeing 777 and PMO to be considered as a navigator, if that's the right analogy. And let's see who's actually driving this, or who's the pilot there, and who's eventually accountable for this. Because at the end of the day, not only the project failure, and especially in this downturn, people are watching everything, and any slightest failure which has got direct or indirect impact on the bottom line and reputation, it's taken very seriously. So what role is PMO supposed to play in terms of, having this Boeing landing or taking off safely?
So I think the first thing that you have to do when you're looking to answer a question like that is to define what are the services and expectations of the services that are delivered by a PMO. So is the PMO a point of management? Is the PMO a point of resource balancing, escalation, financial reporting, or is it really management? What does management mean in this context? And then the next thing is to separate the responsibility for delivering those services from the accountability of success. And what is the PMO actually, or the project manager associated with a project, accountable for? So if the service is to provide accurate planning and resource allocation and financial analysis of a project, then that can be achieved successfully without the project being successful. Now, that's not a very good situation to be in, where a project manager is not being incented for a project to be successful. So you have to get that interesting balance. At the end of the day, the functional lead or the executive sponsor of a project is accountable. And by centralizing a PMO, you create an interesting dynamic where there could be finger-pointing and blame pointed at the PMO for failing to execute on the project, and hence the project's a failure. At the end of the day, I wouldn't tolerate that behavior, because the executive sponsor or the functional lead for the organization who's implementing the project is at the end of the day accountable for the delivery of the project. The project manager is just like that Boeing 747's navigator. They're there to assist the pilot. So I think the question goes is what's the relationship between the pilot and the navigator? What's the relationship between the accountable owner of the project and the project manager, and how does that dynamic work? The larger the project, the more complex that will be as you introduce many project managers into the mix, and so that single executive responsible and accountable for the implementation of that project really has to work out how it's going to operate with the PMO and who's going to be functionally responsible for what. We, for example, offer financial portfolio management for our MIS application projects. So are we responsible for the department's finances? No. We're responsible for accurately reporting their usage of their money against plan, so that they have the information necessary to help them make the right decisions. A bit like Thomson Reuters' sort of marketing mantra, which is providing information and tools to allow people to make better information, to make better decisions. I think that's what the project manager's role is in a large organization like ours, is to provide the executives with the information and the tools and processes to make decisions based upon that information to allow them to be effective in executing the project. At the end of the day, none of the resources on a project have reporting relationships to the project manager. So the project manager is in a situation where he or she can point out to the executive that deadlines are being missed, that things are slipping, and suggest mechanisms by which the executive could deal with the situation. But at the end of the day, the decision is going to be made by somebody else. So the project manager is not necessarily making decisions. It's more a point of escalation and a point of information gathering and sharing, and then facilitating the decision making. And it is being accountable for making the actual decisions. And I think that needs to be clearly articulated between the project owner and the accountable individual and the project manager, so that there's a very clear delineation of responsibility for those decision-making authorities, and that the executive responsible doesn't wash their hands of their responsibility for making the tough decisions, and instead uses the project manager to help them make those tough decisions. And I think that's an ideal way for the relationship to exist, to allow the executive to be held accountable, yet the project manager to be held accountable for providing the information and tools. So, for example, if a project failed because the project manager had failed to point out to the executive that we just missed 2 milestones and we were over budget, then it would be right for the accountable individual to say, I put my trust in the PMO, they didn't provide me the information. If, however, the PMO had escalated that information regularly, highlighted it in the appropriate ways, and still the executive ignored it, it's very clear where the fault lies in the failure of the project. So I think that the definition of the services and functions within the PMO is going to drive the accountability, the authority to make decisions versus facilitate making decisions, and hence will make sure that the success or failure is attributed to the right people within an organization.
So we all know that it's not uncommon for PM organizations to be created from scratch, but leveraging the existing IT professionals, if it's an IT PMO, or even people from outside, from business side together. Now, that is knowledge and that is experience from within the organization, which could be very helpful, but at the same time, they don't have the necessary background always for them to be able to do the justice, because, you do not acquire that knowledge overnight as of what type of insight, what type of performance, and what to look for. So is there someone from outside that is needed for someone to come and really make the right type or help make the right type of PM organization, or you would just learn as you go? But if you're learning as you go, then you're going to make mistakes in the process, and there's a lot riding on what you tell to the rest of the organization about how to run projects.
Yes. I think it's a question of leadership, in that with the right leadership in place, you can develop an organization to perform well through training, through the right recruitment, etc. So how do you find the right leader for a PMO, and what is the experience, skill set, and education that's required to lead a PMO? And I think it will depend very much upon the scale of the PMO, the size of the projects, and the number of projects that you're needing to manage. For example, if you're managing a PMO of 50 people, that requires a very different skill set from managing an organization of 5 or 100. And so you've both got the human resource management aspects of the PMO that needs to be there, and then also the experience and wisdom to bring to bear the right processes and to spot where process improvement should exist and where best practices need to be established. So I think that you couldn't put in place a leader with no experience of project management and then expect them to be successful. At the same time, do you stand there and say, okay, everyone that leads a PMO needs to be certified by the Project Management Institute? No, I don't think that's necessarily true, because at the same time, the person who leads the project management office isn't necessarily a project manager themselves. So I think that one needs to factor in the type of project, the scale of the project, the experience of the people that you will be using from the organization, and then the number of people you're looking to recruit. I have a number of project managers that I've worked with over the years that have been through the Project Management Institute, and I've been very impressed with the people that have got their PMP certification. PMP certification is interesting because it requires not just, if you like, education and bookwork. It requires a lot of practical experience. So when you see someone that's PMP certified, it means that many executives have put their name on the line to say this person has managed projects successfully. So the nice thing about that is it's almost a certified way of getting a reference that you're hiring someone with practical experience of managing projects. So I certainly like the process of PMP certification by the PMI. I think that's a very valuable tool, but by no means a guarantee of success. Putting someone like that into a dysfunctional, chaotic organization doesn't mean order's suddenly going to be restored to the environment. So I think that good leadership, the identification of the skills that are missing, good recruitment of experienced project managers is going to be essential. And I completely agree with your earlier statement that just pulling people out of an existing organization isn't necessarily the best way to structure the most effective PMO, especially if you do not have the skill sets necessary within your organization to manage projects successfully. I think we're blessed in our organization having a balance of very experienced and senior project managers that we could call from, as well as people that have been used to leading large organizations. And so leveraging those skills, we've been able to construct an organization. It hasn't stopped us having to go out and recruiting senior project managers where we were short of resources with that skill set. And at the same time, we're working to educate and pair up less experienced people with more experienced people so that they can develop those skills necessary to manage the larger project. So I think the success comes down to strong leadership and being very honest with yourselves about the skills within the organization and your expectations of performance of those people to make sure that you are only putting people from within your organization into roles that they can be successful in.
Let's take a quick break, listeners. We'll be right back after these messages and see if PMO the existence of PMO and the effectiveness of PMO is dependent on the type of projects that are being run, because every day, not only the different technologies, but the very execution and planning of projects is changing, and people are trying to come up with new ways, including this new agile methodology, which totally changes. It's a disruptive way of the way project management is carried out in terms of communication or documentation. You assemble the team differently. Your allocation of tasks, delivery schedules, and what is measured in terms of success. So with everything totally changing, even if you got the best PMP certified individual, they may not be, you can say, prepared or groomed or incubated yet to be able to handle it. And if that's the case, including the top person who's sitting at the PMO, they are equally clueless. How do you introduce such projects into PMO? And if you don't bring them into PMO, then that's one project sitting as a zombie and being executed without the oversight. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back and discuss.
Mom? Dad? How long should I wait for you? Mom? If I'm at soccer practice. What if something happens? Will you come get me? Should I stay where I am and wait for you? Or go to Grandma's house since it's closer? Should no one pick a place for me?
There's no reason not to have a plan in case of a terrorist attack.
Mom, if you're not home, should we go to the neighbor's house? How do we keep in touch with each other if the phones don't work? Should I be worried how we all get home?
And some extremely good reasons why you should.
Can you tell me?
Everybody should have a plan. Take 5 minutes to talk about where you'll meet and how you'll get in touch with each other in an emergency. For other things you can do to be prepared, visit www.ready.gov. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Ad Council.
Looking for flexible ways to scale your IT efforts? Then visit www.avol.com today. Avol helps companies find the global IT talent they need to align their IT and business objectives. Whether it's hiring top IT leadership talent or building a reliable technology team, Avol delivers. To find out how Avol can help your company, visit www.avol.com or call 1-800-947-2832. Avol, delivering global IT talent. That's www.avol, A-V-V-A-L, avol.com. Visit today.
Self-leadership is more important than corporate leadership. In the hustle and bustle world we live in, we need to be reminded that in all failures and successes, we are the common denominators. Each week, let Daniel Gutierrez help bring you the tools you need to manage self-leadership, resulting in self-success. Make your mark in your industry. Make sure you listen to Right Here, Right Now. Brought to you by Waste Management every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Business Channel.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. If you have a question or comment, call toll-free 1-866-472-5790. Now back to the show. Here's Sanjo Gal.
Welcome back. So we're talking about agile methodology and how PMO can contribute to the projects in terms of oversight and best practices, where the people, starting from the leadership all the way down to anybody else who is involved in the project management office-related activities, are not aware and are not educated and are trained to handle project methodologies like this one. And there would be many more coming. So how do you handle these disruptions?
Yeah, I think that Agile brings with it an interesting cultural change that challenges just about every aspect of the way we develop projects. I was involved in an adoption of an Agile methodology for the building of a product 2 years ago. We had never worked in that fashion, and we brought in an Agile coach to help us as part of the project team with some experience of what it meant to the technology side. What we didn't realize, and we thoroughly underestimated at the time, was the impact that it would have on the product management aspects of the process. The agile methodology brings with it a great deal of uncertainty into a project when you start looking at traditional waterfall methodologies of project management where milestones may be out for many quarters. In our project, our milestones was to achieve the next deliverable in 2 weeks. And we always had purely a 4-week horizon, which is we would have defined the outcome for the next 2 releases in a continuum, which made it very challenging for an organization that was used to planning its projects over a 3 or 4 quarter cycle. So it required a great deal of change there, and we were ill-equipped on the management side to deal with the level of change, not just in the project management, but in the product management, in the deployment and release cycles, and the impact that it had on the whole organization. So I think just like any change, a change as marked as going from a traditional waterfall-based approach to an agile-based project approach is a tremendous change, and it's going to impact the project manager. There is a type of individual that deals well with change and one that doesn't want their cheese moved, to quote that, who moved my cheese. I think that our ability to deal with change and to learn and understand the changing dynamics in the reporting, in the finances, and in the way that you dashboard the success and failure of a project is tremendously impacted by our ability to deal with change, our desire to change in some cases, where people just resisted the idea of moving to a methodology where there was less predictability about the long-term outcome of the project and a lot more predictability about the short-term success of a project. So I think that you're absolutely right that it's a very challenging area, but I think it's one more about leading through change, which is how can we identify those people that are going to be successful in changing processes and methodologies, who are going to be good at influencing people around them. For example, if you're going to move to an agile methodology, how are you going to be able to negotiate the change in financial reporting that's going to require to the finance organization and the CFO? Who's going to do the education of the difference in the style and information that you can report as a project management office on an agile project as opposed to a waterfall project? And so those skills in influencing and negotiating are going to be tested very heavily by a process and methodology change. I think the other thing is that change like that can't be done in isolation. So a project management office can't just decide, I think we'll change methodologies. Those things need to be negotiated and planned with all aspects of the business that are going to be impacted, from the executive committee, the finance organization, the product development team, the product management team, and then finally through to the PMO, and making sure the PMO themselves are educated and experienced and have got in the skill sets necessary to do that. I think another area where this kind of challenge exists is when you have a unique project that's totally unlike the things that a project management office is used to doing. Let's take a hypothetical situation where you have a company that's used to building tin cans, and you're managing the production of different types of tin cans, and they suddenly decide, well, I actually want you to project management the construction of a new warehouse. And you have no knowledge or skills as to what it means to create a warehouse. The milestones that you traditionally would report on tin can production have no meaning in the context of a warehouse creation. So how do you get that information? Can you expect that in a project management office that's optimized around tin can production suddenly to build a warehouse? And I'd say you're setting yourselves up to failure if you don't carefully examine the knowledge gaps that are missing in your organization and look for creative ways to plug that, whether it's bringing in external resources or having your team educated by people that have successfully implemented projects like the sort of the unique one-off that you're introducing. And so I think that the important thing there is to be honest and open to the fact that you do not have the skill sets within the organization, and then make the decision as to whether it's appropriate for your organization to become skilled in that project, or whether it's just an appropriate thing to bring in external management to help plug that gap for that period of time, because you won't be doing another one of these projects again in the short term. So I think it's a case of examining the delta and seeing whether it's something where you're trying to change the norm to a new norm, and hence the PMO needs to respond to it from a strategic level, or whether it really is a tactical project where it's more appropriate, if you don't have the knowledge and experience in your own organization, to get it from outside.
On behalf of the show and our listeners, I'd really like to thank you, Chris, for sharing your thoughts about while the IT PMO being not the perfect solution for the problems that we face in dealing with our projects. However, there should be enough meat in there for you to be able to go and sell it as a product and justify it, even though there's an economic downturn.
Yep, I think it's a really challenging time, and I think PMOs give us a great opportunity to add some value.
Thanks you again, and we also know that there's no doubt about PMO can bring structure and predictability in management of multiple IT projects, and it can also introduce efficiency leveraging the best practices and standardization. Most organizations are either underutilizing PMO or don't need it based on their current and long-term objectives. And given the downturn where every penny counts, the goal should be to first justify the very existence of a PMO in an organization. And if at all you need it, then remove any inefficiencies and redundancies to ensure that significant positive ROI is achieved. How important is IT PMO for your organization? Do you need it, or do you have a lot of slack in there which you need to remove? Please send us your thoughts to views@ciotalkradio.com. That is views@ciotalkradio.com. Thank you again for listening to CIO Talk Radio. This is Sanjog Aul, your talk show host. Till next week, take care and God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. Join Sanjal Gal next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Pacific for another hour of CIO Talk Radio.